bad.
What is up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I am so happy to bring you this episode, and I'll tell you why I'm so happy to bring you this episode. One, it's because I have two great guests returning for part 2 of this podcast. If you guys haven't listened to part 1, please go back, listen to part 1. Both these guests have been on the show previously, so you can go in the archives and look up Hunter Maats, look up Adam Kokesh, and you can see the appearances they've done solo, and great conversations. You really can get a more personal conversation about their backgrounds and opinions. But part 1 of this conversation, or part 1 of this debate, went so well and we had so much fun that we had to do a part 2, and that's exactly what we're doing here. Adam Kokesh, if you're not familiar with him, he's an activist, Iraqi veteran, author of the book Freedom and Libertarian. And Hunter Maats is also an author of The Straight A Conspiracy. He's also a host of Mixed Mental Arts with Brian Callen. And both very interesting, smart, well thought out, opinionated people who just are perfect for this type of platform because they're both willing to challenge each other. They're both willing to listen to one another, and you have to do both to make this work. But the other reason why I'm so excited about this is because for some weird ass reason, this is, I think, almost the 140th episode, 139. I'm up there. It's many episodes, and only twice have I clicked out of Pro Tools after recording a podcast, went back to edit the podcast the next day or a couple days later, whenever, and the audio's gone. And that's exactly what happened here. I almost had a heart attack because the last time this happened was when Hunter Maats was on, and I clicked out, I saved it, went back, and it was gone. And it's weird because, like I said, almost 140 episodes, and both times it's happened with Hunter Maats on the show. But because I saved it, I figured the audio has to be somewhere. Last time I didn't make, but I asked if Hunter Maats would be willing to come back on, record another podcast, even though we talked for like 2-3 hours the first time, and we recorded another one just because it was his first appearance on the show, and I didn't want to not have some good quality audio to share for his first appearance on the show. So luckily, I got to give a shout out to my friend Glenn Murphy at Rocket Internet Security. He's helped me so many times with computer issues. If you guys are looking for data recovery, if you're looking for any type of cleaning up of a computer, anything that has to do with computers, call Glenn Murphy. Hit him up on his website, rocketinternetsecurity.com. He'll get back to you quickly. He can remote connect with you and fix your computer if you have any issues whatsoever. He's the guy to call. Great customer service. He's quick. He's super affordable, and he's willing to go over and beyond to help you out. So shout out to Glenn Murphy, because if it wasn't for him, I'm not sure this podcast would exist, because I can't tell you how upset and disappointed and all the swears in multiple languages that came out of my mouth this morning when I opened up Pro Tools and I didn't see the audio after doing a great almost 2-hour podcast yesterday. So I can't thank Glenn enough for making this happen. But back to the podcast. If you guys want to see the video version of this episode, go on our YouTube channel and search the Ripple Effect Podcast, or look up RV Theory 6, which is also my Twitter handle and my Instagram handle and all that stuff. So or like I said, you can just search Ripple Effect Podcast, you'll find it. And you can see the video version of this episode. You'll be able to see Hunter, Adam, and myself have this conversation. So if you guys want to do that, please do subscribe, rate the show, and all that good stuff. And if you want to support the show, I do have a Patreon page. If you guys can afford to help the show financially, please do. All that money goes to keeping this thing going. and in this case, paying Glenn for helping me find this audio. But most importantly, share the show. Tweet it, share the podcast art on Instagram, share it on your Twitter account, Facebook, anywhere. Upload it anywhere you want because it's all open source. So I'm giving you the green light to do that if you'd like, and just share these conversations because I think it's very important to show the world that we can have people who disagree, have conversations, and really realize that they agree on much more than maybe they even thought. And in the beginning of this conversation, that's exactly what happened. I was trying to get them going early, and with the hot topic, and they found out that they agree on a lot of shit. And then eventually 10, 15 minutes in is when they started to disagree, and then that continued for most of the show. But it was a great, fun conversation, and I can't thank these guys enough for coming on a second time and taking the time to do this. And that's the beautiful thing about this podcast world is I've gotten to meet tons of really awesome people. At the end of this podcast, like almost every podcast, I definitely feel like I grew and I learned something, and hopefully you guys too. So share the podcast, rate the podcast, tell your friends about the podcast, and let me know if there's any two guests that you would like to see on at the same time to do a similar type of format. So also, if anybody wants to take a part of the conversation, some quote from one of the guests, a small knowledge bomb to quote Hunter Maats, any part that resonated with you, an idea, a sentence, anything like that you think is really interesting, that maybe is a minute long or less, or maybe a little more, a couple minutes. And if you want to send it to me on Facebook, Twitter, whatever, on one of the social media sites, send it to me. I want to start a playlist that has short clips from the Ripple Effect podcast, just maybe really interesting ideas or lines or quotes or a short opinion on something that will be easy to share, and we don't have to keep people's attention for too long. So it's just something I want to do. I think in some ways it's easier to get people to find the show if there's a bunch of these little clips kind of roaming around YouTube. So if you want to help, great. Thanks again, guys, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Yeah, what I was saying was when you were in Providence, because I'm in Massachusetts, it's not that far of a ride. I was trying to get out of work early so I can throw you an email and go up there and do some drinking with you, because I love Providence. It's such an awesome city.
Yeah, well, we had a volunteer meeting in Providence, and then we actually had our event at someone's place where we got to have a really cool backyard.
Oh, nice.
Like there's this giant rock with a fire circle built into it. It's really cool.
Oh, that's badass. Yeah, it's cool, like just being able to meet people and connect with them. I mean, through the internet, it's different because all you see is comments and retweets and stuff. But when you actually
bubble.
Yeah, but when you get to put a face to, the people that you're connecting with, it's it's more intimate, and they get to meet you, which is cool, because I know from your perspective it doesn't seem like a huge deal because you're like, I'm just Adam, but from their perspective, I mean, they're huge fans of yours. So I mean, to them,
there we go.
Oh, you're there.
Jackpot.
There you go.
Sorry, Adam. I know that all this government got on your way to get here, and then all this free market got in my way. I mean, Jesus, let's just get rid of them both.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being with me, guys. I'm so glad we get to do a part 2. I really felt like, it's funny because I like the long formats because sometimes the conversation will take you places. Sometimes late in the conversation, 45 minutes later in the conversation, where you want more, and so to be able to do a part 2 and and now that you're probably a little more familiar with each other's opinions and stances and stuff like that, you can really jab at each other and go at each other a little better. But I don't know what you guys want to start off with, but one thing that I thought about starting off with was because of, obviously, I'm sure you guys can't avoid it, all this conversation about the kneeling and the football and all that stuff, freedom of speech and all that stuff, really kind of it's connected to racism and white privilege and social welfare, and I mean, like, all these things are grouped in one, in the same kind of conversation. Usually the same person that is complaining about people not standing for the anthem, it's the same person who says, has a specific opinion on social welfare programs and all that stuff. So I kind of want to, and those are conversations, especially with Trump winning and some people believing that, not all Trump supporters are racist, but all racists are Trump supporters. It seems like people might be more outspoken about maybe some racist opinions or things that might have come off as racist. And it seems like with these social programs, there's always this battle with, okay, well, if you give them more money and you give minorities more money, which are groups that we've suppressed in the past, it doesn't fix the problem. So how do you fix the problem? And so I don't know if you guys have opinions on. Have you thought about this? Have you thought about
are we starting already? Because that was like a great setup of the topic.
Yeah, well, we're starting right now. Yeah, well, I figured we jump right, because it's kind of a hot topic, but I think the whole kneeling thing, like to get into that specifically, I think is ridiculous, because I think we all agree freedom of speech is important. If guys want to kneel, if guys want to stand, who gives a shit? Like, let them have the right to, if they, even though it seems kind of silly, like how are you protesting police violence by kneeling on the anthem? I can see how like it's hard to connect that, but if that's the way they want to do it, then I think like Adam's book Freedom, I'm all about freedom, and people should have the right to protest however they want, and and I think we also have opinions on nationalism and what they use the anthem for and what they're actually trying to create, like this cult like thing where everybody's kind of saluting and hailing the flag, and people forget what that flag has meant for many different people, for many different countries. So I think perspective is very important. But so who wants to start? And is this a topic you guys want to kind of jump into?
Well, Hunter, you don't have any opinions, do you?
I cede the floor to Adam. Adam is, he's running for president. Let the man, have his platform. Go for it. Lead on, sir.
We're both full of so many rich opinions. That's what makes this a fun conversation, right? Oh man, you're right to point out that this has an intersection with a lot of different subjects, and I really think it was a beautiful thing that Colin Kaepernick started with that simple gesture, and it was a beautiful way in his circumstance to get people's attention and make a point. And from that perspective, whether you agree or disagree, absolutely beautiful point of activism, well done. And the fact that now he has such a broader base of support is amazing. When it comes to do you have the right to protest, it gets a little complicated as you apply to this situation. Yes, you have a right to anything that comes from your self-ownership. You have a right to speech, you have a right to expression, but you don't have a right to do those things on other people's property. And you don't have a right to do it under any employment circumstances and keep your job if you do something that I disagree with as an employer that makes me want to stop paying you, I have the right to stop paying you. And so it gets kind of complicated in this case because all professional sports in the United States are so heavily subsidized because they feed into collectivism and statism in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of like petty rackets around stadiums and subsidies and things like that. So it's kind of hard to argue, is this a public space? Is it a public building? If it's owned by a city, if it's owned by a corporation that's paid for by tax dollars. So it's kind of a tricky case. But one thing is really clear for me, that the president is using this as a wedge distraction issue to get people riled up. And that's just really, I think it really discrediting of him as president to step into what is essentially a private employment thing. When he says the sons of bitches should be fired, first of all, you go, of all the things that the president could be devoting his time and attention to, like really this, and that he stepped in so inappropriately. And I do think there are racial overtones, but I don't know if that's really the center of the issue. I know if you're a persecuted minority, that is legitimately very central to you. And I think Donald Trump does reveal some bias. Is it really worth dissecting? I don't know. I don't care. I think this is an opportunity for people to examine nationalism and patriotism and really critically look at those things. And I think in a sense that's a good thing for the conversation. But again, we're being distracted from much more significant things. And now I don't even know, because we're talking about this, but I saw a really good meme earlier today where someone said, while we've been talking about football, things have gotten screwier with North Korea. The banks have printed more money. Congress has done some other, horrible things to the American people, and we're talking about football.
Yeah, and I think the weapons of mass distraction is really, I think, the most important thing to take away from this. And I think, obviously, so much of what ends up happening is people tend to sort of look at what's happening in their own country, and then they are sort of limited to one data point, and they don't realize that this is a systemic pattern around the world. So, for example, what's been going on in South Africa is Jacob Zuma, who's in charge down there, has been in cahoots with the Guptas, who are a private family who have co-opted much of the economy. And they actually hired Bell Pottinger, which is one of the premier PR companies in the world, to deliberately stoke racial tensions in South Africa as a way to distract from this collusion between private enterprise and government. So I think the important thing to realize here is that, where you put your attention is ultimately what is going to get solved or not solved. And the oldest sort of the dictator's handbook has always been to divide, distract the people so they cannot hold the government and their institutions accountable. There's a joke that Libyans tell, which I think is really telling, which is that 3 people are in a foot race, and they each have a bag of rats, and they have to make it across the line with the bag of rats. And the first guy, he runs 50 yards, and then the rats all get together and they chew their way out of the bag. The second guy is like, fuck, I'm going to have to run really quickly because otherwise the rats are going to get together and chew their way out of the bag. So he sprints, and he makes it 100 yards. But still, again, the rats get together, they chew their way out of the bag. But the third guy, he runs, and he shakes up the bag as he goes so that the rats never get together, and he makes it across the finish line. And that's Gaddafi. And that's really the dictator's handbook. And so the oldest strategy of any sort of political leader has always been to divide and distract the people so that they can't realize that the real issue, what we should actually be paying attention to, is, corruption, collusion, the slow robbing, what's often called the iron triangle between private enterprise, government, and lobbyists. And so I think that's, I gave Adam a little bit of a hard time. He's running for president of the United States. I'm a little bit nervous about the whole idea of dissolving the government, having been in stateless societies. But one area where we can definitely agree is these weapons of mass distraction, and that the real issue that we should be focused on is this sort of complex collusion where, that's where we're all being robbed blind. And what do we do about that? Well, we can figure that out, but what it's going to really take is a lot of attention from the general public to then start to actually solve these issues.
Yeah, that's interesting. So in regards to actual social programs, okay, because, I think we all agree that there's been minorities historically that have been suppressed in the past, and it's not really fair when somebody gets to start at third base to make it home and somebody has to start in the batting cage. How do you fix that? Because obviously you get, and you see a lot of like gym conversation, and a guy will be like, oh, these lazy fucks, I'm working every day and I'm doing, and this and that. And it's like, well, you can't stop giving them food and shelter and help. But you can make the argument that doing that doesn't fix the problem either, because there's a good documentary called, I think it was called Poverty, which I briefly watched, but I've heard somebody talk about it, and I got the concept, this idea that sometimes these nonprofit organizations actually do more harm than good in certain countries because they go there and they end up taking business away from local businesses and all this stuff. So then they leave and, nobody has money and, or whatnot. So that... I get that, you don't, and same thing with, you can make I have a couple of friends that are Native American, same thing. A lot of these guys were given money. It's like, oh, sorry for our crimes, but now they're alcoholics and stuff because they have they just take the money and they live in this little area and they drink and they get hammered. So sometimes just giving people what they need doesn't necessarily fix the problem. What's your guys' opinion on that?
Teach a man to fish.
I agree. Jesus, Adam, what is this? We're agreeing. This is, the whole dynamics. But
okay,
Ricky, I think the most important thing...
I think you guys will disagree on probably how to fix the problem, right?
Well, I think the first thing is to go back to something that you said earlier, right? And this is where I am going to agree with Adam, is, you use this word talking about cult-like in terms of the nation state and statism and all that sort of stuff. And it is a cult. Like, everything is a cult. Humans are cultish, right? We create mythological creatures called founding fathers. And the problem is that essentially there are really rival cults within the United States. In one set of cults, in one cult, the founding fathers are gods. They can do no wrong. They're these genius visionaries. They're perfect. And in the other cult, they're racist, inveterate devils who are only interested in their self-interest. Now, in reality, these two sort of mythological figures exist, but there were actual humans. And these actual humans were, much like our own parents. They were flawed. They got some things right, they got some things wrong. And, if we actually wanted to sort of sort out, who was Thomas Jefferson, well, that's a long and complex process by which you'd have to read all the available source material. And then you'd have to recognize as well that not all the information is available because, the historical record, even from as recently as a few hundred years ago, isn't complete. Mm-hmm. We don't know everything about Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson worked very hard to create a public image of himself, as to a certain extent we all do. There are things we don't reveal. So the point is that I think that the big problem is that, these nation-state cults are really at this point have become unworkable, right? They're impractical. And they've just become so loaded down, and Adam used the crucial word here, complicated, right? Like, you've now gotten to a stage of complexity where it's like there was a social contract that was drawn up in 1776, right, 1789, that, now it's like there were basic problems in there, and then we had to line out some stuff, add some addendums, and, if you look, for example, at the amount of legislation that exists in the United States now, it is so large and so vast and so unwieldy that it's no longer serving the people. It's not user-friendly. And complexity has always served rent-seeking interests who want to line their own pockets, because the point is that they're the ones who know the ins and outs of the code. They know how to make it work for themselves, and it doesn't serve the guy who, has a full-time job, has a family to take care of, and doesn't really have the time to deal with that. And so throughout history, there have been periods when essentially the government has gotten so unwieldy that there has had to be systematic reforms. So, one view of why the Byzantines, why the Eastern Roman Empire lasted as long as it did is because Justinian went in and he simplified down the legal code. So he basically whittled away all of that stuff. And, the Napoleonic Code did very much the same thing. And some people believe, there's a famous book by Joseph Tainter called The Collapse of Complex Societies, that the reason why societies collapse is because they become so complicated they become unusable to people, and they just disengage with them. So here's where I'm gonna agree. I'm gonna offer something that is potentially partially agreeable to Adam, which is that there needs to be a massive simplification of the legal code so that it serves the people and that it is user-friendly. There's no doubt in my mind that government as, a sort of system of law is just, it's unworkably large. I think that we need some sort of Justinian or Napoleonic type reform.
Well, you seem to be a lot more on the same page as me than you were last time. That's a huge shift, man. I think I should pull a bush here and declare victory and pull out. But no, I want to go back to this idea of the cult that you mentioned, and I've never heard it presented as like. So I know you're going roughly liberal conservative. I know you use the founders as your proxy for that, right? But that there are different cults within the United States. The way that I've always used the term cult is more about the cult of statism itself, and in that analysis, the Republicans or Democrats or fans of the founders or opponents of the founders, whatever, would be sects of that cult. But the core element that unites all of the cult members is, in the definition of the word cult, a misplaced or excessive admiration for a particular person or thing. And the thing that unites all of these sects of this cult of statism is that they all believe that there should be a central authority that is geographically based, that has some monopoly on violence or initiation of force or coercion or law enforcement or whatever it is, some artificial claim of ownership within that territory that is, obviously illegitimate by normal private property standards, or what we would generally accept as a claim to property. When, a king or a ruler or a government or a group of people comes in and says, well, we just, own everything within this territory, and come up with different legal words to excuse it. But I want to turn this over back to Hunter, if I can suggest a different strategy based on how things went in our last conversation, which is, first I got to explain that, what my assertion is here, and I think the critical divide that makes this a fun conversation is that what I'm advocating is universal nonviolence. What I'm advocating is a voluntary society. What I'm advocating is that what we're doing now with violent coercive monopolies, we stop doing. Whereas the position that Hunter is taking fundamentally, and it's great that we're on the same page now in terms of fundamental reform needed, and I would say now the same direction of radical simplification. But Hunter is taking the affirmative position in this debate from a standpoint of logic and reason, that he's saying this should happen. I am saying it shouldn't happen. And I think in that sense, the burden of proof is on Hunter. And I think if we allow him to make these justifications for what the government should do or should be, because government is violence, government is force, and basically every time he comes up with a new excuse for violence, or his new justification for whatever form of force that he's advocating as justification for government, then I'll dismantle it. We'll go one at a time, and then we won't have the problem that we had on the last one with him, straw manning me and misrepresenting my position. So if Hunter, if you want to start with what you think is a justification for the existence of government, what you think, what legitimate social functions are better achieved from violence and coercion than peaceful cooperation, I'd say the floor is yours.
Well, Hunter,
thank you, Mr. President. And I think that the most important thing to realize is that all systems of government, or all systems of economic, any way of organizing a group of humans, rests on assumptions about human nature, right? And so before you can even start to build out a system of government, you have to look at your assumptions about human nature.
No, I don't think that's correct, because what I'm doing is applying ethics to politics. And I think that the standard of ethics that I am saying is relevant to this, that is self-ownership, the non-aggression principle, it really doesn't matter. It applies to, whatever your vision of humanity is, fundamentally good, fundamentally evil, really doesn't matter. Either way, this is the standard of ethics that shows the way forward to a better society.
See, and this is the real divide, Adam, is that you start from theoretical philosophical principles, and I start from basically a scientific mindset where you have to look at how does the world behave, and how do humans...
Sorry, you're misrepresenting again, because those principles that I come to, that I'm advocating as foundational to this philosophy that I'm presenting, come from a scientific analysis. It's like after you go through enough scientific analysis of how government works, society works, ethics works, then you come to a law. Like you get to decide, oh yes, we can reasonably say that this is a law of physics, of gravity is a law of science. And in that sense, you discover through scientific experiment fundamental principles. And so then you're able to apply those principles to do things. And the principles that I've come to are from that scientific analysis that, oh yeah, all human relationships are better without violence, without coercion, without fraud.
So then let's clarify those basic assumptions about human nature. Let's clarify the science of humanity, what we know and what we don't know, and where we agree and what we don't agree. And I think that if we can get on the same common ground about what human beings are and how they work, then we can sort of look at, how do we reach our conclusions about how you build out a society as we currently understand them. And then, that's the thing. For me, ultimately, the point of this conversation is, we're having this conversation, but really, presumably there are people watching, even if it's only our moms. And, so therefore, Hi, Mom. And so hopefully this is, useful to people, I think, really to sort of see, like, how do humans think? How do these three humans think? How do they build out their worldviews? And then where might the problems be? So, I think the first thing that is important to clear up is that we are primates. We're apes, right? And that, that is our lineage. And that, we sort of come from the same basic family tree genetically as chimps, orangutans, bonobos, and that, we have to acknowledge that. Because very often what happens when people are talking about politics or philosophy or religious systems, there is this bright white line that they draw between humanity and the animal kingdom, and they forget that we're animals.
With you there.
Great. So then we have to start to clarify, okay, so knowing that, what are some things that, because we're not exactly the same as chimps or bonobos. There are some important differences.
Bonobos have way more fun. They're way better.
They have way more sex. Yeah. That's definitely true.
And and they're less violent too because of it, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, if this is really what Adam is proposing is some sort of, mass orgy society, then, yes, fuck it.
Let's evolve to bonobos. We get government out of the way. Then we can realize our potential as a species. No, okay. That was a joke of a straw man, right? Okay, just checking.
But so, I think that, there are important things to recognize, like the fact that, feeling and thinking were always linked. So our emotions always are driving our thinking. And that, as a result, things make sense to human beings. We have this thing called naive realism, where people's beliefs make perfect sense to them. Obviously, in terms of dealing with that cult of statism, that cult of statism makes perfect sense to people because it's all they've grown up in, all they've ever known. And, they're able to endlessly rationalize that. This is something that we see with human beings, whatever the cult is. So part of it is that human beings are inherently cultish, right? Like, sure. We make cults, we make belief systems, we make meaning systems, and those meaning systems always make sense to us.
I might resent saying or try to differ with you. Does that make us inherently cultish? But yes, we have this tendency to collectivism and identification and cultism, if you will, or as a tendency of behavior. Yeah, natural.
Yeah, and I would say, but I mean, I think this is okay. So this is great. So then this is the perfect, like, let's clarify this. I would say that humans are cultish. Like, that is the nature of us. The big difference between us and, say, chimps or bonobos is that we are much more cultural. We are the ape that can accumulate and build culture. We can build symbolic systems. We can build meaning systems. And those symbolic and meaning systems make perfect sense to us. Okay. The big break comes with agriculture, where, we lived as hunter-gatherers. We had these tribes of 150, and that's our Dunbar number, right? We can't track more people than 150 relationships, right? And so therefore, what happens is that there evolves culturally a series of sort of big myths that serve to create these tribal confederations. First, we get sort of bands, and then ultimately we start to get large state societies like Babylonia and Egypt. And what we've done is that, as we evolved those large state level societies, the first mechanism of sort of holding that together was this cult of personality around Pharaoh, or, the Babylonian dictators and emperors and all of that.
Well, hold on. I would actually step back a second here and challenge a little bit of this narrative in that perhaps, now I'm not, anthropologist, sociologist, I can't, but it seems to me that there's another possible step that you're discounting here when you say with the rise of those societies came the rise of the cult of personality as a way of holding them together. I think that it's possible to look at the pre-agricultural human tribes in a way that you would see that there was probably a strong, dominant, physically dominant male leader in a lot of those groups. And if anything, that was more of a cult of personality in the sense that the personality of that person that they have, within their 150 size or less group, that they're able to be known as the biggest, baddest, asshole, or protector, or, guy who can beat off the lions, whatever the, thing it is that makes that person dominant in that environment. And if anything, while the cult of personality became concentrated, it might have become less violent because it was creating a bigger, more cooperative system.
This is one of the most.
Just so that there's
This is a super, super important question. And, it's like, to what degree are humans more like chimps, where you find that sort of violent, brutish, dominant behavior? And to what extent are we more like bonobos who like to fuck a lot, right?
Well, regardless, we've evolved, I think you would agree, we've evolved intellectually and in mental capacity away from either of those tendencies, but that both have, some relevance to our understanding of ourselves.
Well, we have to be clear on what we mean by evolved in our intellectual capacity, because genetically we haven't changed that much in the last.
No. I mean from bonobos and chimps.
And so what we've evolved is we've evolved a culture, right? And so our cult has gotten better. And our cult has things, it's evolved better and better tools, like, for example, the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have done unto you. And what that is the golden rule is a workaround for the Dunbar number. Because essentially what it means is that even though you and I don't know each other, we don't have a relationship, right? I start from the assumption, Ricky has vouched for him. He's probably a good guy. He's dressed in this amazingly, American John Bunyan way. Like, he can just, where's Babe the Blue Ox? Like, he's a trustworthy guy. He's got a good teeth, the whole thing. So the point is that, it's this great workaround. And even when Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan, what he was doing was he was basically trying to defy tribalism. Because, at the time, the Samaritans were, the enemies of the Judeans. And so Jesus tells a story, a man gets beaten and left for dead on the side of the road. And he says, a priest comes along. So a guy you think is going to be a good guy. And he fucking doesn't do anything for him. A Levite comes along. The guy who you think is going to be a good guy does nothing for him. And then a Samaritan comes along. The guy you think is going to be an asshole, and he helps him out. And so the point is that instead of judging people based on what their tribal affiliation is, you start judging people based on their behavior. And in terms of the sort of voluntarism that you're talking about, you're evolving more and more towards a society where instead of judging people based on tribal affiliation, you're judging them based on their behavior.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Absolutely. It's huge. And it seems like one of the ways that we're, stuck in that tribalism, especially as a way that holds us back from applying a system based on reputation better is like, just you look at the police force. Oh, you're a police officer, must be a good guy. And then we see all the disastrous consequences of putting too much unchecked power in the hands of law enforcement.
But so the question then, Adam, is okay, so we're seeing the ways in which we're overcoming these old tribes like Samaritan and Judean, right? Mm-hmm. And I absolutely would love to overcome old tribes like American and Russian. I don't think that those old nation-state myths are useful to us anymore. I think more often than not they're harmful. Or if they're going to continue to exist, they should be treated with the seriousness of intramural college sports. Right. Where we like...
Yeah,
not an excuse for violence, but...
violence in any way, yeah.
Yeah. But we play Ultimate Frisbee, and we have mock rivalries, and it's all good fun, right? I mean, even if you look at soccer teams in the UK, right? Like, that gets too intense. It comes to this place of hooliganism. It comes to this place of violence, and is no longer. It encourages behavior that is sort of the worst of tribalism that we wouldn't want, as opposed to a sort of lighthearted tribalism. Mm-hmm.
Right. So the form, if I may point out, then it's this natural evolution of our tribalism or our desire to associate with groups, and I don't know if I think I'd like to remove the word tribal from it at some point and say just the way that we come together and associate with our fellow human beings gets better and better over time, from geographic limitations to we have more resources, ability to move and communicate over large spaces and affiliate with people based on our needs and interests and things like that. So what we have now with the internet is this amazing tool where we are already seeing people identifying on a regular basis in ways based on their identity as individuals. individuals with others and how they relate to people, rather than, well, you were born in this place or this place, and therefore, that's what's important. So, I mean, just look at Facebook as one giant voluntary association. You've heard if Facebook was a nation, that it would be the biggest on earth, or right? I mean, and if you look at just individual Facebook groups and pages, now it's like we have the ability to create associations, affiliations, groups, on exact things that we want to pursue moment to moment even.
But let's look at Facebook as a nation state, right? Or let's, whatever you want to call it. How functional is it? Like, is Facebook, able to create coordinated action? Is Facebook able to effectively hash out its differences? Is Facebook able to decide, what are the norms of this culture? What are the norms of the society? Or is there no shared social contract?
Well, more importantly, is it able to start any wars, violate anybody's civil liberties, steal anybody's property?
That's because Mark Zuckerberg, God bless him, doesn't have a monopoly on legitimate violence because the people haven't given it to him, right? And, the point is that, that monopoly on legitimate violence, how is it acquired? Well, if you look at, the Pharaoh or anyone else, it's seized, right? I mean, all governments start out. I mean, I know that in the sort of libertarian movement, it's popular to use terms like mafia state and, the fact that these people are godfathers and that it's a protection racket. And that's precisely what it is. It's a protection racket. That's how these things start out. And then, the way that the godfather really legitimates himself is to make himself the only game in town and to become the government. But there is a reason why these protection rackets has existed throughout history. And that's because if you didn't grow up inside the United States, you didn't grow up inside Europe, then you're framing the world in a very different way, right? And I think last time I probably mentioned, this famous Arab saying, that it is better to live 1,000 years in tyranny than one day in anarchy. Anarchy is, that sort of band-level genocide that existed in the very, very early days of human history. And there's a lot, in terms of anthropologists, people will disagree on what those historical rates of violence were.
Well, can you define anarchy first? Because people use that word to mean lots of different things, obviously.
Yeah, I would define anarchy as the absence of some sort of nation state, and it doesn't even have to be a nation state, of some sort of empire or something that has a monopoly on legitimate violence.
And then what is legitimate violence?
The legitimate violence is legitimated because, there's two ways. One, it's either legitimated by the people because the people have sort of bought into the social contract in some sense, or legitimated because anybody else who tries to use violence, you're effectively able to wipe them out and kill them.
Okay, so legitimate, you're saying, has nothing to do with, is it ethical or is it good or productive necessarily?
No, it's based on what you can pull off and what you can achieve.
Okay.
So, the point is that, for example, let's play out a scenario here. I talked about The Walking Dead, right? So, there's this region of, spoiler alert, guys, there's, in the later seasons of The Walking Dead, Rick has sort of got this tribal confederation. They arrive in Alexandria. They're doing fine. But then essentially, this chieftain, right, Negan, comes in, and he's able to establish a monopoly on legitimate violence over Rick and the Hilltop community and a bunch of other communities, right? Because he is better able to organize a larger group. He is willing to use degrees of violence that nobody else is willing to use. And therefore, he basically establishes that monopoly on legitimate violence within the community. And he can do things like take away people's guns. He can, punish anybody who opposes him. He determines the law. And that's sort of what early human societies are like. It is that monopoly on legitimate violence. Now, the point is that Rick, and I haven't finished watching season 7, and season 8 is starting soon. But season 7, Rick starts to challenge that already. It's clear that the group is chafing under this. So if the group is able to organize with other groups, like the Hilltop community, they may ultimately be able to overthrow Negan. And then potentially Rick and his group become the monopoly on legitimate violence.
So would you say that that's not anarchy, right? Those are like very small amateurish nation states, but by your
exactly.
And those are nation states. Well, then I would want to go back and challenge what you've given again as your historical narrative here, that if Negan, and again, I don't think this is a great proxy for reality here, but if Negan qualifies as a nation state, then so does, in the primitive human tribe, the one alpha male who physically dominates everyone. And I would say that that's a more offensive, that's a more dominant nation state than what we have today. Now, a lot of libertarians make the mistake of assuming that big government is always worse than small government, and I can disprove it always very easily to them with this and say, well, would you rather have a government where it's half the population and it more or less provides what the market would provide? Yes, it has a monopoly, but it's peaceful, it respects people's rights, it just has a monopoly and all these things, and it calls itself government? Or would you rather have a government that's tiny, that's 1% of the population, but kills every firstborn child? You see, this is kind of the evil of government. The measure of tyranny is not how big is government, but how much does it disturb the natural potential harmony of people cooperating instead of having violence. And if anything, I would say then we've become more free and more peaceful over time. And if you look at this measurement of violence, you go back to that primitive state that you said was anarchy. It can't be anarchy because there was a lot of legitimate violence in intertribal warfare. And we know this actually very clearly from the anthropological record that we had a much more violent society in primitive times than we did now. So if that's the case, then what you had is much more violent totalitarian tyrannies. It was the opposite of anarchy, and we've gotten closer to anarchy as we have progressed.
See, Adam, this is the fatal flaw in your argument. So the first thing is, what are the dynamics within a tribe? And if you look at hunter-gatherer tribes, the dynamics within a tribe, you don't tend to find these sort of big dominant dictators within a tribe. Because what happens is, because we're within that Dunbar number, the group is very good at policing social dynamics and making sure that people's heads don't get too big. So when hunters go out hunting, they tease each other, right? And that teasing is there to manage social status. And they have all sorts of mechanisms for controlling power dynamics. So for example, if we went out hunting, right? Ricky makes great arrows. Well, I would use Ricky's arrows. And then the kill, if I made a kill, which it's very unlikely that I would be the one who make a kill, it's much more likely that you would make a kill. So let's pretend you make the kill with Ricky's arrows. It would actually count as Ricky's kill in many tribes because it was his. So what we're now doing is we're making sure that Adam doesn't become some sort of Negan-like figure, because we're able to very well manage that dynamic within the group. And then when Adam brings the kill back to the tribe, he brings it into the center of the village, he divvies it up so that everybody can see. So those policing mechanisms within tribes are quite good. The problem was, the reason why there was so much intertribal violence is because of this Dunbar number, because essentially there was no shared myth that bonded people together. And I don't think that it's possible for humans to escape tribalism. I do think it's possible for humans to create bigger tribes and create a tribe called human, in which, we have whatever differences we all have, but we're clear on this thing we called our shared humanity. And so therefore, we all sort of have bought into this larger myth. Well,
regardless of your point about the different mechanisms of checking power within those societies, I think the metric of violence is the most important one. If people are dying, even if it's intertribal, that means it's still a failure of the system to create harmony and productivity between humans, regardless of what 150 or smaller tribe they fit into. So like you said yourself, the idea of reputation, it's just that we created bigger systems of reputation that happened under government that actually disempowered the government's ability to kill people. And that's a good thing. That's part of progress.
But it does matter why it was more violent, right? If we go with the idea that the past was more violent, it does matter why they were more violent, so that we can understand the reason for that, and then we can handle that, right?
Haven't people argued that too, that notion that it was more violent? Because I know Christopher Ryan has talked about it, where he argues with Steven Pinker's work that that they were more violent. I don't know if you want to get into that, but I mean, I know you're trying to make a bigger point.
Yeah, so I mean, Chris, this is part of why I'm a little bit cautious on this, is specifically because Chris Ryan questions the sort of Pinker narrative of violence, where it's sort of a downward line from the past. Chris sees it much more as violence was actually quite low in sort of hunter-gatherer society. Then with the rise of agriculture, you see this massive rise in violence, and then maybe you've seen some sort of historical decline. So there are different models of the violence, but I think that
I'm not familiar with his work. What is his refutation of Pinker's observation of the archaeological record of just the analysis of the cause of death of primitive people that tracks very clearly with that linear decline, or that decline in violence?
It comes down to the quality of the data. So I don't fully understand all the anthropological data, but that is, Chris wrote a book called Sex at Dawn, which is about what behavior is like in hunter-gatherers and what we observe with hunter-gatherers. And the point is that Chris would do a much better job of this than I would, which isn't hard because I'm going to do a terrible job of it. But the point is that there is some contention about what the exact shape of that graph of violence looks like, and Chris takes issue with Steven Pinker's whole narrative. But I think for the purposes of this discussion, we don't necessarily have to get into that. We can accept that that they're clearly there's no doubt that the Egyptian empire, the Egyptian kingdoms, the pharaonic kingdoms, or Babylonia or Sumeria, there was a lot of violence, right? There was these huge conflicts between these empires, and I think the point is that what it really comes down to is, why do we see that rise of violence, and why do we see this decline in violence? And I think, the decline in violence is the rise of more and more sophisticated cultural software, and more sophisticated technology, and more sophisticated mechanisms for being able to handle all of this. So I think these
communications, connectedness, accountability, the development of systems based on much more effective reputation accountability, right?
That's right. And so if we can agree on that fundamental dynamic as we were coming into present times, I think that's enough to continue your narrative. Yeah, and so, and that's the point, is that it is my narrative, right? And that's what humans do. Humans tell narratives. We tell stories about reality, and those stories are based on whatever our data set is and whatever our experiences are. And those stories are then driven by our emotions. And I think when you listen, for example, to the way that libertarians talk about, government, like in your book, you say government is cancer. Right? So you framed government as in a certain way in your mind, right? And part of this, having this monkey mind, is that, what Shakespeare said a long time ago, which is nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so.
Well, hold on. About just, again, to make sure my position is clearly represented here, I'm thinking in the book, I said government is like a cancer. I did not say it is a cancer, and I meant it in a very specific sense, in that, like a tumor on society, as the American experiment has shown, it can metastasize, it can grow out of scale, and that if you really want to stop it from committing that, you don't remove 80% of a tumor, you cut out 100% of the tumor.
Right. So that's your story. That's your narrative, and that's the story that you've told about government, right? If you buy into that analogy, right? If you buy into that metaphor, then yes, the conclusion that you reach with that metaphor is that you want all the cancer gone, right? But the point is I don't think that that's a good metaphor. I think that we would agree that. Go ahead.
And it's certainly not a complete one. And as you know, I wouldn't advocate the exact same treatment for government as for cancer. And that, yes, you can remove a cancer right away, but even that has to be done methodologically and carefully. And similarly with government, the methodological, careful way is not to have a revolution and immediately get rid of all systems of government, but a process of decentralization, of localizing government down to the community level, at which point I would say, by my definition, it's not actually government.
Well, see, and that's the thing. I mean, so much of this is going to come down to, how do we define these words? How do we envision these things? Like, if your definition of government is sort of this, the current state of bureaucracy, right? And sort of this overgrown, bloated, unaccountable system.
No.
What's your definition then?
because that's a description. That's not a really.
Right.
If someone tries to pass that off as a definition, you're better than that. You have a higher intellectual standard. A government is a territorial monopoly on the initiation of force.
But so would you have? But wouldn't you see? Okay, so you want essentially. So describe to me. So I live in Los Angeles, right? In Adam's world, right? What does Adam becomes president and he implements his plan. What does my life look like?
Well, it really doesn't change much, except that your federal taxes disappear. Your contribution to the warfare state, the military-industrial complex in every way goes away. You now have choice in currency that you're going to use. You can use something, whatever you want, without having the U.S. dollar system forced on us through a system of federal taxes. You won't have the security state spying on you, the NSA, the FBI, the CIA. You won't have to worry about any of those agencies infringing on your rights. The police in Los Angeles will be a lot less militarized, and the state of California will be able to create laws that are more in line with the needs of the people of California.
So this is, I think, the big area where we're going to divide is on the idea of power vacuums, right? Do you believe in power vacuums? And what do you think humans do in the environment of a power vacuum?
Yes, I think this is, again, why I advocate for a orderly, responsible dissolution and a gradual localization rather than any kind of revolution or overthrowing. Because if the paradigm of a society is that they need a government and you just take out their government, blow up parliament, the people are going to go, oh my gosh, well, we better create a new government. And out of that's the vacuum. The suction force of the vacuum is the people demanding government. And into that vacuum come the worst of society, the opportunists, the most evil people possible. So the way that you avoid that is make sure that you don't have that opportunity in the first place. And if you dissolve government one layer at a time and you maintain the subsidiary forms of government in the United States, states and county and city governments along the process, then you avoid the problem of the vacuum, because the paradigm adjusts to having decentralized government as we go. And the specific things that people want governments to do that are legitimate services, nobody says, I want government to violate my rights. No one says, I want government to audit me. No one says, I want government to arrest me for a victimless crime. When we get to that point where government is really based on people's needs at the community level, at that point we would be transitioning to the voluntary systems that would really displace government entirely with nonviolence rather than the coercive systems.
But there are, let's say 196 countries right now. Mm-hmm. So you get rid of the federal government in the United States. What do the other 195 countries do?
Rush to catch up, because we will be so much more prosperous, so much more safe, so much more free, and enjoy life that much more without the burdens of the federal government. A lot of this is stuff that people don't even see. But when the federal government, when the Pentagon just loses $6 trillion, that comes out of our hides. When we see the waste and expense, the disgust at the federal level, that's money that could be going to curing diseases, to helping people who are suffering in poverty. That's a lot of resources that are being diverted from meeting human needs by corruption. And I really want to do, like you said, you opened the conversation with, what we had as our shared concern of the collusion between business and government. And this is really how you separate them, is by making government localized and responsive to people.
But see, the problem is that, in essence, looking at a global level, government is already localized, right? It is localized to the nation state. And there isn't any sort of effective, global government. Right? We're very bad at coordinating on things like climate change, or even, we're bad at coordinating on global security.
That's not true. On climate change, governments all over the world are coordinating very well in that racket from every level, from causing it, from subsidizing oil and gas corporations to creating more pollution, to whatever legitimate effect that you can say that humans have on the climate. Governments are doing a great job of creating a problem, making it look like it's worse than it is, and coming in as the only possible solution. If anything, what we see in global governments now are, within the United Nations, we see the system where there is greater accountability, but it's really not through the United Nations. It's just through the fact that we're connected like never before with the internet, and it's much harder to start a war, and the worst that governments can get away with. Again, there is a part of Pinker's work that even with this dispute that you put up from Mr. Ryan is not really refutable, which is the decline that we have a good historical record for over the last couple of 100 years. Am I right about that?
I think you can even say 10,000 years. I mean, the point is that it's really the rise of agriculture. That's the big question.
Yeah, so that irrefutable then decline in violence, I think, is just a testament to how much more accountable states are to their people in this world. And if anything, we have centralized governments becoming more decentralized in their functions over time. When we talk about dissolving the federal government of the United States, we're talking about 3 million personnel, depending on how you want to count it, out of 22 million working for government at all levels in the United States. We're really just talking about cutting off this wasteful, disgusting layer of fat at the top.
But we're not, we agree on the problem of corruption. We agree on the problem of collusion between government and business. What I'm saying is that, you have these other actors. You have 195 other nations, right? Mm-hmm. And you're saying we're just going to, you remove this corruption and then we're going to just kick so much butt. We're just going to be winning so much that then 195 countries are going to be jealous of us and be like, man, let's follow the Kokesh plan. Let's implement the Kokesh doctrine here in Libya. And, I know you were in Iraq. I don't know if you spent any time in Libya, but I'm sure that it's, there are a lot of similarities there. And, the big problem in Libya is actually small tribalism, right? It's the fact that the nation state is not an effective entity. It's not an effective national myth. There isn't real buy-in. And, Jacob Zuma, his whole power is his ability to exploit division within South Africa. So, you need sort of a shared national myth or even a shared international myth, which is what I'm pushing for, which is this, this understanding of our shared humanity and a tribe called human in order to be able to effectively coordinate. But that doesn't...
For that's what you just said really proves my point, in that it's that shared myth, but that myth in the past has been tribalism, has been statism. But as you just said, what I'm advocating is that it should be based on a universal sense of humanity, of what are our inherent rights. That as an independent human being, you own yourself, and this is the foundation for ethics. And that recognition of that, I think you could say, yeah, if you want to call me a globalist, maybe you want to say, oh, Adam wants to displace government with a global code of ethics. Yeah. And if you get governments out of the way, you get government decentralized, you end up with more global systems. I'm a fan of the internet. I think it is huge and essential to the human progress that we're experiencing. You could call that a global tribe, a global nation state. If you want to call that a nation state, then Adam Kokesh is a globalist, and I support the universal, acceptance of humanity as being, this foundation of ethics. And so if what you're saying is, Adam, we want government to be voluntary, because we want society to be more peaceful, and you want to really stretch this definition of government to say, well, yeah, the internet's a government, and it's a global reputation system, and we can have mechanisms within that to hold people accountable and be more peaceful. I'd say, yes, I'm not going to call that government, but if you want to call that government, then we're on the same page. And if we want to see that world realized, what we have to do is get the systems of coercion out of the way that are preventing us from fully implementing that. And if anything, we've already achieved that. In a way, we've already won. We've already completed this, or at least the essential phase of this part of human evolution, where we have embraced this global vision that we don't let governments just lie us into ridiculous wars because everybody in that country wants to kill you. We don't fall for those myths anymore. So if anything, what we're talking about here might be kind of semantic, where I'm saying, hey, get rid of the coercive systems so that we have place. We have more room. We have more of society determined by social organization determined by voluntary systems. If you want to call those government, fine. So if what you're advocating for is global systems, I say, yeah, as long as they're voluntary. You get the United States federal government out of the way. The states are doing the same thing. We still have more or less, the same basic concept of nation states, just localized, more responsive to people. And what we're going to see come out of this already is that you're going to have a desire for a national, as in interstate, reputation organization, dispute resolution services, all of those things, smart contracts, lots of things that we're already capable of, and just starting to realize the potential with the technology we have in front of us on the blockchain. So if then it's just a question of how do we make this transition? And again, the burden of proof is on you if you're saying that we need to maintain these violent institutions that we have now in order to make that transition. I would say then you're dead wrong.
Well, firstly, I'm all in favor of globalism. I think the point is to have a tribe called human. I think the social contract needs to be renegotiated because I think the problem is that, we essentially have 196 social contracts. A large part of the problem, it seems to me, from the libertarian standpoint, is the fact that you didn't author the social contract. You were just sort of born into it. You were born into a particular passport or whatever. But I think the point is that, part of the reason why you've talked about, the sort of how do we make this transition? How is this disorderly dissolution done? Because, history is littered with people who, were fed up with the old system, threw out the existing system, and then, wanted to build a new system, right? The French Revolution, right? You remove the monopoly on legitimate violence of the Louis, and then what you end up with is the terror.
Oh, I'm much more a fan of the Buckminster Fuller approach of don't fight the old system, work to render it obsolete. And I would make the case that the kind of big central war-making, taxing, wasting, corrupt, colluding governments are already obsolete. We've already got the replacement, and we're dragging this crutch along that's slowing us down. Get rid of the crutch.
Yeah, but I think the thing is that, you said that, we sort of already know this. I think you have to bear in mind that there's a huge difference between the three of us having this conversation and a lot of where the rest of humanity is right now, right? And so, I'm all in favor of globalism. I think globalization is great. I'm pro-globalization, right?
Well, hold on, just semantically here, I got to interject because a lot of people think that globalism means global government, as in a single violent authority. And I think what you're talking about with globalism is not that. Am I correct?
Well, I think, I believe in evolution, right? I come from biology. And, I also believe that science or really anything has to be a collective endeavor because I think that individual humans are quite dumb. We have blind spots. We're not even aware of what our blind spots are. That's precisely why you need a large group to be able to share different insights and evolve an intelligence and an insight that is far greater than any of us would come up with individually. So I don't necessarily know what systems would or would not emerge from this global conversation that we are having, right? But, I think in general, the real question is in terms of, where everybody is right now, right? There are a lot of people, and, 2016 was the year of this, who want to have stronger nationalism, who want to double down on that. That's a lot of what the election of Donald Trump was about. It's a lot of what Brexit was about. There's been a rise of sort of these sort of puritanical movements, right? Obviously, ISIS is one of those, and they're happening all over the world. And that's precisely because a lot of people are having difficulty transitioning to this new global society that you're talking about. They are much more comfortable and much more familiar with the old cultures that they grew up in. And so the main thing that I'm focused on is helping humanity transition into this new environment. And, I think that as we clarify those assumptions about human nature, and some things are clear and some things aren't, but as we start to clarify, who are human beings, how do we actually work as a species, that what will emerge is a renegotiation of the social contract. And, I think that in the end, the question is, what will things like dispute resolution mechanisms be? And I don't think
those things have all been, there are lots of things that we already see developing in those arenas.
There are.
Evidence. You say like, what's it going to look like? We have tons of examples of every function of that you'd want in that. And you don't need a single central authority. I think the critical element of this is that in the kind of globalism that maybe we both see as that ideal vision, right, where humanity is united in an embracing of basic human rights in a system of reputation based on nonviolence. And I would say that's not governments, but that we relate then to that collective not as tribes, not as collectives, but as individuals. And the closer we are able to get to that first, the sooner we can make that possible. In fact, I would say that's already what's making it possible. When someone logs on, they're communicating with the world as an individual, not as an American or a member of whatever tribe they're a part of. And I think, again, if we take the violent part of government and we get that decentralized, we get that what has to happen by geography only happening by geography, by territory, and things that can happen virtually, things that can happen by data on the internet, by communication, that those happen in a decentralized, nonviolent way. And that's how you achieve that global vision that you're advocating.
But at the same time, Adam, I mean, this is the interesting thing, is that you're talking about human beings organizing as individuals, right? And, you know, you were born in the United States. I think you were born in San Francisco. And, you know, America has a strong cult of individualism, right? And that cult does not exist in a lot of the cultures of the world. Right?
I don't know. I don't know. I think America's turned into a cult of collectivism. I mean, you go back to how we started this conversation. We have Americans getting upset that football players aren't, you know, performing their sacred, you know, collectivist rituals, you know, and it's like, well, that's not. I think, you know, there's a cultural tradition somewhere in the American heritage of individualism, but at this point, it's much more clearly a culture of collectivism.
But regardless, what you end up having is that, you know, already there, right, you have different ways of organizing and different ways of conceptualizing human beings, right? And, you know, the point is that some people are going to want to act as groups. And so if you have a group of individuals who are organizing as individuals, and you have a group of individuals who are organizing as a group, right? Well, you know, there you're going to have a conflict. So inevitably, there are going to be conflicts between human groups. You're not going to have 7.5 billion humans, and that some groups of humans are not going to end up trying to organize and challenge the power or undermine or take over from the other groups of humans, right? That they'll try and, you know, Neganize the whole thing. That's just part of human social dynamics. And again, I come back to Federalist 51. If men were angels, we would not need government. The challenge is that in creating governments to rule over men, right, you have to make the governments first rule over the people and then to check themselves. And so what you're dealing with is, I think that, you know, the basic problem is that there is this sort of break in human history in a lot of what I hear you saying, where you're talking about sort of escaping tribalism. And that's, you're saying escaping human nature. And human nature has not changed genetically in the last 100,000 years.
That's really not central to my message, because I'm not against collectivism. I'm not against tribalism. I'm against forced collectivism. I'm against forced tribalism. So if the people in those groups come together voluntarily and everyone who's in that group has the right to secede or to leave at any time, I don't have a problem with that. So let's say, I mean, and I don't want to misrepresent you. Apparently, Adam, I misrepresent a lot of people. So, you know, this is a problem that I struggle with. Ricky has been patiently working with me on it. He's a very good guy about it, you know. Well, but to authority with the Federalists, that's obviously irrational and disprovable. This idea that if men were angels, government wouldn't be necessary. Not that that's not true, but that the point that is implied in that is that because men are not angels, we need government. Well, if men aren't angels, they certainly can't be trusted with violent, unchecked power over other people. And some form of that being a monopoly means removing a check. Well, if it's all based on cooperatives and nonviolent, you know, associations, then there's no unchecked power. So this idea that, well, we're going to find we're going to find the one angel among men who's going to wield this power.
We're going to find that's the point. There are no angels. And so, I mean, that's the basic problem is that, you know, I mean, people will form coalitions and they will try and dominate other groups. And so that's why ultimately you need that backstop, that monopoly on legitimate violence that sits over the entire organization. And then you create systems of accountability, which the founding fathers did, where essentially everybody gets a say in holding that system of accountable. Now, of course, when the founding fathers authored that contract, not everyone actually got to hold the system accountable.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what government is doing, is saying, well, not everybody really gets a say all the time. Some people say it's going to be limited. We're gonna take their consent. We're going to impose the will of the majority on the minority, and they don't really have a say. Whereas the answer, the everybody gets what they want solution, is government down to the level where it's voluntary, community-based. Everybody gets what they want out of that. Everybody can get a government or a system that they get to choose to be a part of that gives them what they want. And when you get it down to that point where it's voluntary, you don't have that problem that you were pointing out earlier.
But this assumes, like, there are, human psychology obviously has lots of different parts to it. And so, the three of us, we decide to form a society, and it's all super nice and it's all going to be voluntary and all this sort of stuff, right? But then Ricky and I start talking, and Ricky and I are like, Adam's a handsome guy. He's powerful. He's strong. He's banging a lot of the chicks. Like, I gotta say, like, this whole bonobo fantasy where we're all getting laid all the time. I feel like he's not, he has this big physique. There are these muscles that he has, and he's just, all the proteins going to him. Like, fuck him. Like, we're better off without Adam. Fuck Adam, right? And so therefore, even though Ricky and I are much weaker, we team up against the sort of big alpha male, even if you've been super nice and super voluntarist and all of this, and we decide to fucking kill you. And we sneak up on you with a rock. And maybe you bust us, right? And so now you're like, oh, fuck these two fuckers, right? And, now you're going to try and hold us accountable. And you decide that in order to sort of achieve some sort of social stability, that you're going to have to, resort to more violent methods. I'm not saying that this is what would happen, but it's a possibility. These are the sort of mechanisms in human psychology that can play out. And so the point is that the fact that our system of government as it currently stands is not a fulfillment of the principles that the founding fathers articulated does not mean that we shouldn't evolve to actually operating that way, where actually you have a society where we deconstruct bad myths like racism and sexism and homophobia, and when we deconstruct bad myths about some people being supernaturally intelligent and everybody else being dumb, and evolve a society that is really inclusive and really accountable, or certainly much more so, but still ultimately looking at human history, that backstop of that monopoly on legitimate violence that can resolve these conflicts, and that you want to evolve towards a system where less and less violence is required in order to maintain that social stability. Because you have to include the fact that for most of human history, the world has looked like Game of Thrones or The Walking Dead, and that they have welcomed Khaleesi. They have welcomed some sort of large figure, the War of the Roses. That's what Game of Thrones is based on. Well, and they were glad to have a king who came in and reestablished that monopoly on legitimate violence, reestablished that protection racket. And protection is something that is super important. And I think that ultimately this is the big problem for you, is that, humans have always chosen a protection racket for a reason, because the war of all against all sucks. And, you are ultimately, the goal, I think, should be not to have no godfather, but to have accountable godfathers who are selected by the people and who only have 2 4-year terms.
Okay, well, when you say godfathers, that's not necessarily managers of a violent, coercive monopoly, I would hope. But I think what you've given me the opportunity here to do is illuminate what I think is a much more crucial distinction here. And I'm very confident in the assertion about what is really underlying this decline in violence, whether you agree with Pinker or just the modern trend. And I would put it to you that it is inherent in the development of any intelligent life that progresses, that gets smarter over time, not necessarily biologically, but with the help of computers, with cultural memory, with all of the things that we figure out together, with science, that we get better over time. We get more capable. We get more productive. And what we do, as the market has a natural preference for things that yield more productivity, that we get better over time at cooperating. And that we have a natural tendency to pursue relationships that meet our physical needs, that make us more productive, that make us more able to create air conditioning and heating and buildings and food and entertainment and blah, 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 running water, electricity, right? And we realize that if we want to be violent with people, like in the scenario that you suggest, like what if the two of you want to gang up on me because I'm getting a little too alpha? You know, I think at some point you would admit that that's a mistake, right? That's not a rational decision for you to make, right? That it's, you know, even in if there is some limited case where you can say, okay, well, it's rational, and if they kill Adam, they're going to get laid more, and then their genes are going to get passed on, and there is that. But I would make the case, again, very confidently, that it is a part of the natural course of the progression, really, of life itself, but of any intelligent life especially, to seek systems based on greater cooperation. And while governments may have taken monopolies on certain systems within that because of the technology that's been made available, I think that and cultural memory, technology, cultural memory, expectations of ethics, the proof in history that violence is bad for humans' ability to meet each other's needs, that leads us towards a less violent society, that fundamental trend of humanity progressing, of getting more intelligent, more capable over time, that is connected to the decline in violence, that is what fundamentally drives it, regardless of the superficial trends of the organization, that when in organizations in which that is manifested, you can argue from history one way or another. What is absolutely clear is that, like a law of science, again, that you have yet to even attempt to refute, that nonviolent relationships are better than violent relationships. And as we progress, we find better ways of doing that. So there is no immediate consequence of localizing government that is worse than the consequences of keeping large central violent governments today going. And you have yet to refute any of those central points of the case that I make for evolving towards a less violent society, although it is nice to see that in a sense we are on the same page with a vision of maybe a global or a universal, a sense of humanity without any particular tribes dividing it, that there is that universality coming. But I think it's really critical that you escape the cult of statism, that you get over this unnatural veneration for the current existing models of society that we've gotten to at this point in human history, that we can do better, we are doing better, and that the way to evolve past them is to shun all forms of coercion, of what you would call legitimate violence, which I would say is never legitimate, is never helpful for humanity. But these ideas of governments as coercive, violent, territorial monopolies is absolutely obsolete. The sooner we move past it, the sooner we will achieve the vision that I think both of us share of a universally nonviolent society. Well, I don't know that you're ever going to achieve universal nonviolence. I think you can definitely massively reduce the amount. So I'm not suggesting that. But no, universal nonviolence in the sense that it is a rare aberration where one guy gets drunk and loses his senses, not where we have systematic, ongoing systems of violence or even, of poverty and drug war driven violence, getting rid of all of those things as well. Yeah, and I mean, the point is that there's the historical conversation, right? And then there's, what are the adjacent possibles? What should we be doing at this stage to practically move humanity forward? How can we best do that? And in this sense, the last time that we were on the show, Ricky and I talked beforehand, and, part of it is that, in the age of the internet, one is trying to capture attention, therefore one needs... You colluded against me, is that? Oh, yeah, we see already. You see that collusion. And,
we pulled a Hillary Clinton and I gave him the questions.
Yeah. He told me everything. He even told me what your book was. I downloaded it for free. I knew your thoughts already. It was really unfair.
So, I mean, the point is that, yeah, I mean, there was a little bit astroturf to create a little bit of drama, for, some bread and circus for the fans at home, AKA our three moms. But I mean, I think that on many, many areas, we absolutely agree. And, I think regardless, part of what you have to do is, I think the most important sort of adjacent possible is, I don't think it's even governmental. I think it's really just making people aware of these sort of nationalist myths that they've internalized so they can even understand them and then sort of reflect on the problems of them, and to get people engaged in these sorts of conversations so that rather than just sort of shouting at each other or wasting our time with the weapons of mass distraction of, I don't even watch the news anymore. I mean, the point is it's disaster porn. It's a fucking waste of time. And you're much better off reading books or like just actually having conversations with other human beings. So I think the point is that I think we would broadly agree on that. Again, like, I just don't think that I, as an individual, am smart enough to figure out this problem. There are many things I don't know. I have thoughts on the healthcare system, but I'm not a doctor. So, and I'm not a nurse, and I don't have like that insider knowledge. So I think the point is that it's really, I mean, the biggest thing that I feel is that humanity is going to have to solve humanity's problems. It's not going to be solved by a tech billionaire. It's not going to be solved by government. It's going to be solved by this global conversation. So I think that's maybe the most important part of all of this. I would say that, I 100% agree that the tendency over the course of human history is towards greater cooperation. But again, government is part of what has made that cooperation possible. Because when you remove violence as a competitive mechanism in the free market, and the free market is just evolution, but when you remove violence as the form of competition, as, say, a dictator, a Khaleesi, King Henry VII at the end of the War of the Roses did, that now means that the competition is instead in the world of ideas, in the world of money. And the great achievement of Adam Smith was to articulate that you can have unrestricted competition, but within a curated space where violence is not part of that competition, because the referee, the government, has the monopoly on that. Only they get to do that. Like, you don't have a soccer game where we all get to blow the whistle, right? There's a guy who gets to blow the whistle, and then he is structured in such a way that he is supposed to be independent and not have partisanship. Problem is that when a referee does have partisanship, then it gets problematic. So my feeling is that, ultimately what will emerge from this global conversation is that we'll be focused on having better referees that are more accountable, referees that, you make sure that their interests are divested and they're not colluding in the way that Jacob Zuma is, and that the real challenge is to first get to a stage where humanity is not being distracted by the weapons of mass distraction and is really ganging up on the problem rather than ganging up on each other.
Well, I play pickup basketball without a referee, and to make Adam's point, without a referee, we can get some group of people together, we can play basketball, and sometimes there's less arguing than there is when there is a ref, because you're trying to get a call or whatnot. So, I mean, that's just one little example of not having a ref.
If I may just respond to that and close out here with a prediction, because there is a system where everybody gets to blow the whistle. It's called the free market. Anybody who doesn't like the behavior of an institution that's doing anything gets to withdraw their consent immediately. All of their material support taken away. That's the ultimate system of accountability. And I'm going to make a prediction here about how Hunter's perspective is going to change over the next decade. Because even if he doesn't come to realize the value of getting rid of systems of violence in the pursuit of nonviolence, at some point he's going to look around and he's going to say, wow, Adam was right. There are so many other mechanisms of dispute resolution, of accountability, of people communicating without government, across borders, through the blockchain, with smart contracts, with broad public accountability, and systems where maybe not everybody gets to blow the whistle, but a lot more people get to blow the whistle. A lot more people get to be a part of that system of accountability. And at some point you're going to go, wow, these government things, they're just They're just holding us back now. They're just in the way of things. They're just all right, sure, Adam, go ahead. And yeah, you want to get rid of the federal government? Yeah, it's useless at this point. And I think that's a lot of people have come to that realization already. And I think that as we have gotten to in this conversation, it is a little bit of a semantic and a how we get there kind of argument. But I think the main thing that Hunter is missing is how these systems are already developing in so many beautiful ways, regardless of what we do. You say, like, it's not going to be some tech billionaire. No, it's going to be, a dozen people who want to be the next tech millionaire developing the next thing, the next blockchain-based dispute resolution service, the next smart contract system through Ethereum or Nexus or whatever new cryptocurrency comes out. We are already developing things that are making government laughably obsolete. The monetary thing, especially with just the rise of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. So yeah, I think at some point, Hunter, you're gonna go, one way or another, and we'll see. We'll come back to this 10 years from now and see how much more laughably obsolete government is at that point, if it's still around for us to laugh at.
Well, listen, Adam, in the end, what I care about is an inclusive, prosperous system that delivers the best possible results for a tribe called human. So in the end, I'm agnostic to what the solution ends up being, right? My point is that, throughout human history, people have made faulty assumptions about human history. The communists did it, the Nazis did it. And then when you build societies out on faulty assumptions about human nature, you end up creating a fucking shit show, even if it's well-intentioned. And I think that, the important thing about, I think, libertarianism in general is that, it has a tendency to exclude the other 80% of the world. The 80% of the world that is desperate for functioning nation states, the 80% of the world that needs strong.
Oh no, we want to give them all those important, legitimate functions of the state faster than they'd have it through the current systems. It's absolutely essential that we get rid of the systems that are holding back the economic development that will really equalize across the world for everybody to have access to a modern standard of living and a high quality of life. That is absolutely essential to the message of libertarianism, that we get the systems of violence out of the way that prevent the more rapid distribution of technology that's already happening anyway, despite government's attempts to slow them down.
Well, let me ask you this, Adam. So do you think that, and whatever, we can pick Libya, we can pick, Iraq, we can pick whatever system you want, right? But are these countries that sort of, had dictators? Libya, for example, Gaddafi was making moves to reform, to open up, to enter the free market.
A gold-based currency for Africa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had lots of ideas. And were the Libyan people better or worse that with Gaddafi than they are today without Gaddafi?
Well, I think generally they were better with him.
Yeah, I would agree.
Just, an observation of the immediate short-term history. It's kind of hard to refute, but it's not because they've had, again, remember, the measure of how bad is government is not how big it is or how centralized it is. It is how violent and coercive and how much it takes people off that natural state of harmony. And so Gaddafi represented, one way of of distorting that harmony that was less distorting, less violent than, the aftermath of the, Western powers, disruption and overthrowing, and who knows what other behind-the-scenes manipulations that are being conducted right now to further this myth of statism that is so essential to the cult of statism, that large centralized governments are better than small ones. But when we look at the immediate historical record, we go, well, the reason most of the small ones that aren't doing so well aren't able to flourish is because of the interference of the big ones. And one case where we have a great exception to this is Liechtenstein, population less than 40,000, tiny European country where the monarch is an anarcho-capitalist and had a referendum to limit his power that failed. You have small municipalities with the right to secede. This is the closest we have to voluntary government on earth today. And it's small, it's local, and it's produced an incredible boon for the people of Liechtenstein in terms of modernization, industrialization, quality of life. We want the world to be able to have that.
Well, I think that's the important thing, though, is that if we can agree that Libya is worse off without a dictator, right? If we're just comparing that example.
No, hold on. That's not without a dictator. That's without this dictator at this point in time versus with a dictator at this point in time. It's a very limited data point, and for you to extrapolate from that, to be intellectually dishonest.
Well, again, like this misrepresentation thing, this intellectual dishonesty thing, it's a real struggle for me. But Ricky is really, he's patient with me. He keeps on giving me the chance to be exposed to people like you who have achieved accurate representation and intellectual honesty. And hopefully, I think he's hoping that you'll rub off on me as a good influence. So, one
thing I wanted to talk about real quick was cooperation. It seems like, Adam, he believes, and I think that there's some evidence to believe so, that we are becoming, and like you said, from current history, 10,000 years or whatever, we have seen this decline in violence. And we are cooperative people. We are tribal people. We help each other out and whatnot. And, Adam, I don't want to misrepresent you, but it seems like you're saying that we're going in the direction of harmony, where we're cooperating because we understand that it benefits us, it makes us feel good. If we all help each other, we all have better lives. But there is the argument too that we cooperate for survival reasons. The reason why we're social creatures, the reason why the reason why we get together in tribes is because
the same reasons. That's the same reason.
Well, it is. Only one is because we want what's best for everybody, and one's more of a selfish reason, right?
It's all because this is one thing I really do think is an important idea from Ayn Rand, is that altruism is a myth, in the sense that we all live in our own heads. You never get to live outside of your own head. Sorry, that's part of the human experience, So when we do things to make the world a better place, we're doing it because we want to see the world be a better place. As individuals, it's the world that we want to see. And in that sense, it's for our survival, because we feel that that's going to be a world generally that's better for our survival. So you might say that, you differentiate personal preference, communal preference, but really it all comes from the idea of creating value for ourselves. We all want to create a world of more value. We all want to generate, things that meet our human needs as individuals, as well as entertain us and engage us and provide that higher sense of fulfillment. So no, I wouldn't separate those things.
But wouldn't it mean that if we could, like what Hunter said before, if we believe that it would benefit ourselves if me and Hunter teamed up on you, wouldn't that mean we would do so?
Well, no, and it's possible that in limited circumstances that violence is better. This isn't like perfect in every single situation, but clearly, the law of gravity doesn't mean that everything turns into a black hole, right away. It just means that this is the direction of things, and that I think it is inherent, like the law of gravity, to you might call it a law of human nature, that humans are happier, we are more productive, we are able to meet our needs better in cooperation rather than in conflict, and that is central to human development and really a natural course of progression of all intelligent life.
And the interesting thing is, since Adam is now bringing up these laws of human nature, what's at stake here is what's called multi-level selection. And E.O. Wilson and David Sloan Wilson summed it up in a single phrase, which is that selfish individuals outcompete altruistic individuals, altruistic groups outcompete selfish groups. Mm-hmm. So the point is that, and there's this great experiment that one of David's graduate students did with water striders, those little insects that float on the top of water. Yep. So basically, water striders come in two variants. One variant is rapey, and one variant is nice guys. And if you get a group of rapey and nice guy water striders, the rapey water striders will outcompete the nice guy water striders. They're much more aggressive, pursue sexual opportunities and all of that. But if you have a group of pure rapey water striders and a group of pure nice guy water striders, the nice guy group will outcompete the rapey group. So actually, evolution over time selects for larger and more cooperative groups.
Right.
So in this area,
society that's more cooperative will outcompete the tribalistic, violent society. Exactly.
Well, I don't know. The tribalistic part is, again, where I would divide. I would say all societies are tribalistic, right? But the point is that it's the question is, because I think tribalism is just a part of human nature, right? But the point is, the larger, more cooperative society is going to outcompete the smaller, more selfish, violent, shitty society. And so that's why there is this evolutionary force across human history to select for ultra societies, larger and larger and larger and more cooperative societies. So this is where, absolutely, the science, in sort of that large point, 100% on Adam's side, but that's also on my side because that's one area where we agree, right? And so you are selecting for larger and more cooperative groups. The problem is, as Ricky points out, there is the possibility that within that, right, that Ricky and I decide to redefine the tribe. So rather than the tribe being the three of us, we decide, no, the real tribe is the two of us. And then there is this outsider who does not fit within our interests, who is Adam, and we're now going to, take a rock to the back of his head and, try and monopolize the females and the food resources.
Well, it's a good thing I got the bigger tribe of all me and my ladies backing me up.
Oh, shit!
So
of your warrior,
you guys just splintered off.
Well, that was kind of my point.
I was saying you could have been part of the big tribe, but now you're screwed. Now you're going to get stoned to death by a bunch of women.
But I guess that's kind of my point. My point is that even if we did, if we were going in that direction where we are gonna help each other, we're gonna be in harmony at some point. Isn't it just human nature at some point to almost go back to where we are? Like this cycle. Where we'll be like, oh, you know what?
Yeah. Yeah, the course of human history is 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. Of course.
And so the big problem.
Can we maintain?
Well, and this is the big problem, Ricky. Is that so? The Chinese literature. There are 4 great novels of classical Chinese literature. One of them is The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is awesome. And the historical experience of Chinese history is exactly what Ricky is talking about, where these large groups are formed, these large cooperative groups, these Chinese empires, and then periodically they fragment, they split apart into these warring states, right? Because essentially the central bureaucracy breaks down, right? That dictator, that central government falls apart. So what ends up happening is that, the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I think, was written in the Ming Dynasty, but was written about the Han Dynasty. And the opening line of that book is it is a truth long acknowledged that the empire long united must be divided, and the empire long divided must be united. So at a certain point, you've had disunity for a long time, which is sort of where we are now. And, we get frustrated with that. We're like, this isn't working. And so we're trying to unite in some way. So ultimately, I think that's why, I think that part of what's going to emerge is this globalization, this tribe called human, this much, much larger group. But inevitably, what happens is, even if you look at sort of the tribe of the United States, when there's an external threat, as there was in World War II, to the degree which, and some people will say how much of a threat was it, but there was a perceived external threat, and that created a sense of cohesion within the United States. What then happens is that you get far enough away from that existential threat, and then you end up with increasing division, because now we're not so worried. We don't remember, what that was about. We haven't burned our hand on the hot stove of history recently. So I think that, regardless, this is going to be sort of one of the big challenges, is that right now, there are some real threats and there are some real challenges in terms of, automation, in terms of, the ways in which nation states are clashing, in terms of environmental challenges, and those have the ability to bring us together, to work together to try and create a better global society. But 200, 300 years after that point, there's the potential that you end up with real complacency again, and then that at that point, this sectarianism develops, and then the groups split again. And I think, given on the long patterns of human history, I think that's likely.
Well, I'm sorry, I gotta wrap this up if it's okay. I got some people waiting on me here. I got a meeting tonight. I got a 3-hour drive to get up to Long Island from New Jersey. But I want to say, and especially Hunter, you have been way too flattering. One of the reasons that I enjoy this conversation enough to do it again is that because we did this twice, is that you do bring a different kind of intellectual precision and a high standard of intellectual confidence that I think is devoid from a lot of these conversations. And like we said at the beginning about avoiding the weapons of mass distraction. I think, you know, in the face of all of that we're able to have conversations that get to the heart of this are awesome. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the approach that you bring to the conversation on the internet in general with Mixed Mental Arts. So it's mixedmentalarts.com, right? If you're listening, check it out if you want more from Hunter. And Ricky, again, you've done an amazing job hosting this raucous debate. And I just want to say, if anybody wants to get more of this, please subscribe to the Ripple Effect podcast. That's what you're listening to right now. And Ricky has really done a great job of making this conversation happen. And I look forward to what else, you know, comes out of this, and, you know, maybe doing a couple more you know, three-way conversations like this with you, Ricky. So I really appreciate that. So thanks to both of you for making this possible. For anybody who's watching right now, aside from my mom, yeah, go to mixedmentalarts.com and subscribe to the Ripple Effect podcast for more of this.
And where are you touring? I'm hoping to get this up this weekend. So next week, where are you going to be for the next week or so?
We are halfway through the Taxation is Theft National Tour, 68 cities in 3.5 months, and we are in New Jersey tonight, Long Island tomorrow, New York on Saturday, Philly on Sunday. I'm really looking forward to. We always have a great, enthusiastic crowd in Philly. And then we're making our way south all the way down to Florida, going through some of the southern states before coming back west through Texas, up to Denver and Wyoming, and then back home to Arizona for me, ending November 18th in Phoenix.
Awesome, awesome. And what do you have coming up, Hunter? You got... I'm sure you got...
Just waiting for Adam to call. I mean, mostly. That's the thing. I mean, you know, I cleared my schedule. I patiently waited by the email and hoped that he would reach out to me. No, there's lots of fun stuff happening in the mixed mental arts community. You know, we're going to be launching the mixed mental arts belt system soon, which is basically designed to help, you know, as many humans as possible realize that we all blindly download culture, and much of this culture is things like the myths of the nation state. And, you know, the main thing is that, you know, whatever myths you choose to buy into, you know, they should be a choice. You should be aware of that they are myths, and you should be, you know, then you can consciously choose what myths are going to serve you, set you up for success. So that's going to be coming out. You know, we're also very excited for Thaddeus Russell and Brett Venat are going to be having their big LA date out here. I will probably in some way be a part of that. Maybe, you know, they'll let me talk in some capacity, or maybe I'll just fanboy out over the two of them. So, you know, there's lots of fun stuff coming up. But mostly just waiting for Adam to call. I mean, that's the biggest thing.
I've had them both on, and they're awesome. Thaddeus and Brett. Brett was, I mean, I had him on like probably 2-3 years ago. Awesome guy. I mean, really, it's great that we can all be a part of this community of sharing these ideas. And the cool thing is that we all come together, even though we do differ in opinion. But I think more importantly, especially now when we open up this conversation talking about how we're all being separated by these dumb issues like, oh, should they kneel, should they not kneel, we can learn that, hey, you know what you should be doing is having open discussions, having a democratic debate, and being able to share ideas and be willing to have your ideas challenged. Because I think a lot of times that tribal instinct of ours, we do join a group and it's like, oh, I'm a Chevy guy, you're a Ford guy, or I'm a T-Mobile guy, you're a, you know, it's like we join these groups and then we just shut everybody down. So I think more importantly, that's kind of what I wanted to kind of share, was that two people who do come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and yet can come together and have an enjoyable conversation and challenge each other without being too defensive or getting upset, and being willing to invite that challenging in. So I think that's super important, especially now when we're being divided and stuff. So I can't thank you guys enough for helping me share this message. You guys have been awesome. Hopefully we all share this with all our listeners, and we all, you know, some of Mixed Mental Arts fans will go to Adam and vice versa. And we all would share this message. This is all open source, so feel free to paste it, post it. You know, I'm and anywhere you want. I'm all about freedom. So put this anywhere. You know, I'm okay with you know, the message is much more important than all the traffic coming to me. So feel free to do that. So thanks again, guys. It's Thursday night, so go sling some dick and how and Hunter, I saw you stand up for a second. How dare you comment on his shirt? Did you see your Adam? Did you see his shirt?
Dude, this is amazing. This is actually, ironically enough, this is a Chris Ryan shirt. So I am fully representing this Sex at Dawn shirt. So I'm repping for Chris Ryan, and just making sure that, everybody knows that, the Steven Pinker narrative is one narrative. There is another narrative. And, Chris Ryan, I mean, he's much cooler than Steven Pinker. I don't know who's right in terms of the anthropology, but Chris Ryan is the dude, man.
Yeah.
And listen, Adam, I just, you got to duck, but thank you so much. I couldn't agree more.
Adam.
And the main thing is may the best ideas win. It's not about may the best man win. It's about may the best ideas win. And, in the end, let the ideas duke it out.
Absolutely.
You're here.
Thank
you, gentlemen.
Hey, take care. Hey, and safe travels with all your touring.
TheFreedomLine.com.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right, Ricky, it's you and me again at the end afterwards.
Yeah, let's talk shit.
Thanks.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, let's talk shit. So this is when we actually collude and talk about the fact that, Adam has been getting all the females and the protein and all of that sort of stuff.
Exactly,
and are like,
yeah, I love having you guys on. I mean, I've already had. It's funny because every time I think of another opportunity of doing something like this, I'm always like, oh, what two guests? For some reason, it's always includes you and somebody else. I'm like, why do I always go back to Hunter? And but I just think your perspectives and your willing, because the thing is, you don't really have a team. You don't have you're not cheering for anybody, and because of it, I think there's a lot of people who I think would make arguments that you would disagree with and make for a very fun discussion. And James Corbett's one that I've suggested to you that I just had him on recently again, and he's coming out with a documentary I think this Friday, which I'm really excited to. I don't know if you've ever seen some of his work, but he has a great documentary on the Fed called Century of Enslavement, and he has another one on how big oil conquered the world. And he's similar to yourself. You can go so many different avenues. He's so involved in researching psychology and science and geopolitics and history, and I just feel like it'd be a fun discussion. So that's maybe something I might lobby for in the future. Plus he's been on, I mean, a bunch of times. He was one of my first guests to ever come on, and just a really fun guy to talk to. So I think I would love to I guess this is probably just more of a selfish reason. I'd love to hear you guys talk and kind of share ideas and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, I think what you're doing is awesome with Mixed Mental Arts. I think the name is awesome. I love the direction it's going. Obviously, anytime you poke at Tom Woods and you poke at Peter Schiff, you're gonna get some. But I love how lighthearted you are. I mean, you never take anything too personally. I mean, if people don't follow Hunter on Twitter, please do, because I've never seen somebody take insults so well consistently, and then always have just really clever little responses to those to people trying to say that you're wrong or whatnot. So it's just it's really been a blast, and this is what I love about this show. It's just the fact that I get to meet so many cool people. So and do this. So hopefully you're enjoying it.
Well, and I mean, that's the thing, Ricky. I mean, it was a real pleasure to finally be able to meet you in person a couple of months ago. And I mean, I think this is really what it comes down to, right? Like, I mean, Katie O'Brien, fellow masshole, she calls this moment in history humanity's first family dinner, and I really do think that's what it is. And there's a lot of uncomfortable conversations to have, but once you sort of use that analogy and you use that metaphor, it becomes really clear what the challenge is, right? The challenge is getting the right social dynamics, getting to the right emotional climate where we're willing to laugh at ourselves, we're willing to realize how little each of us knows, and we don't take ourselves so seriously and get so wrapped up in whatever story of our human family we've picked up. And so I think that's the main thing for me is that I do have a side, and my side is humanity, right? And so the point is I think that the sort of large, the tendency towards cooperation, I think that absolutely that's what these tools of the internet really empower. I think that's what will emerge. But I think that, people like you, people like Adam, people like me, can really help midwife that in. And, part of that is by really sort of, being willing to create the right. It really is just about what is the emotional climate in this global village, right? Is it one of self-righteousness and stridency and all that, or is it this climate of like we're all playing around with ideas and experimenting and testing out our narratives? And that's really, for me, I mean, that's what science is about. It's about testing what you believe against the available evidence. And it's always great to, have these conversations with someone like Adam in the kind of emotional climate that you create. And you do a really good job of creating the sort of space within your podcast that I would hope for the rest of humanity. Like, if the ripple effect was to spread out and become the climate of the entire internet, well, that's the point. The solutions that would emerge would be fantastic. So, in general, anything I can do to help ensure that ripple turns into a wave and potentially even a tsunami of sort of productive, mutually respectful, humble conversation, I'm more than happy to do.
Yeah, and that's really why I called it ripple effect. I mean, it's really this idea that I get listeners all the time emailing me about how one thing that's kind of inspirational to them is that they do listen to the Brian Callen show. They listen to these other people who they're fans of, and then me, who started from nothing and kind of right from the beginning talked about how I'm calling this Ripple Effect podcast because I believe we can all make a difference. Eventually, I have Hunter Maats on the show. Eventually, I have Adam Kokesh on the show. Eventually, I have, from your perspective, it's one of those things where just like, well, I'm just Hunter, I'm just Adam, I'm just, but from people who are listening who, like myself, I drove from the Berkshires here, took a quick shower, got everything ready on my computer and was ready to go, and like who lived these very normal, average lives, to them, to see me, who lives a very average life, and then kind of make, even if it's a little ripple, but making some type of drift and changing things just slightly, to them, that's inspirational. And that's why I can't thank you, because obviously this can't happen if I don't have the guests who are willing to come on and really won't gain much from it besides just being a part of sharing some ideas. And I'm not gonna sell more books. I'm not for you. I'm not gonna, I'm not, hopefully I do something of that nature, but not to the point where it's worth taking 2 hours of your time. And so I think it says something about the show, but it also says something about the guests, because I think it shows that the guests are just as interested in the unselfish part of sharing these ideas, no matter how big the platform. And even if you impact 1 or 100 or 1,000 or 2,000, even if it's not 1 million right away, just sharing and impacting that 100 or 1,000 or whatever people is important, no matter what the number is. And I think, my hat's off to the guests. I've been very lucky where probably 99% of my guests have been awesome. I've had Chris on. I was a huge fan of Chris, had him on. Super nice guy. To me, and to have you on, I've been listening to you guys forever. It's almost like, yeah, I know. Now I feel like a dick because I'm like, I made fun of your flowers, and then I realized it was a Chris Ryan shirt. And I'm
it's actually not even like that. If I'm going to plug Chris Ryan material, this is actually the thing to plug, because I think it's fucking awesome. It's a paleo modern sweatshirt, which is actually, that's really, I agree 100% with Chris on this. Like, that's the real goal, is to have a tribe called human, which, to Adam's point, does a really good job. Tribes do a very good job of internally managing their own resources without sort of having to rely on coercion. I don't know that you get rid of government. I don't know necessarily what emerges, but, paleo modern, that's the swag to promote. And it's comfortable as fuck, and it's, soft.
And I love the fact that he had the Civilized to Death shirts way before he was even close to completing the book, which is awesome. And it's a cool shirt, so I'm a huge fan of Chris's thinking. I think he was the one who, I think the first time I heard Thaddeus Russell was probably on his podcast a long time ago, his first appearance on there. And so that's the beautiful thing about all these shows, is that on your show, a podcast, I had Sam Tripoli on not too long ago, and I've heard him say this, so I don't want to take credit for it, but he's like, the revolution will be podcasted, and I think, I think there's something to that. I think that I think 4 years ago when I started my podcast, a lot of people, surprisingly, it's still a lot of people, but especially 4 years ago, they weren't aware really what it was. They didn't really think it was that important. I mean, Obama went on a podcast with Mark Maron. I mean, that's crazy. It almost showed how important he thought podcasting was for his image and his legacy and to kind of get young people to see him in a positive light before he left office. And so it kind of shows like the power of podcasting. And obviously Joe Rogan has incredible impact. He's exposed me to a lot of people. I mean, he exposed me to Brian Callen, which is how I got into watching, listening to your show, what used to be the Brian Callen show, now the Mixed Martial Arts show. And it was just, so it's cool. It just, if we all can kind of share. I always say, I'm like, I'm not an expert in any field, but I can share really interesting people, and I'm so curious that I feel like I'm constantly kind of discovering interesting books and documentaries and podcasts, and hopefully I can share that with my listeners, and then do what you said. And then life is this experiment, this science experiment, where you're constantly testing and trying to figure out what makes the most sense. And I really think that's what intelligence is, And I had somebody at work today ask my brother and I, they're like, "Oh, which one of you guys are smarter?" Like just busting our balls. And I didn't get into it, but I'm thinking to myself, like, what's intelligence? What's, I'm like, based on what? But people think in that manner, like, and to me, it's I think what makes somebody intelligent is not the ability to regurgitate information, but the ability to look at the information and figure out which one makes more sense, and which I think you do very well.
Well, but I think so. Firstly, the only thing that I would disagree with Sam Tripoli on is the tense of the verb. The revolution is being podcasted. We're living in the middle of a revolution. It's already happening. It's been happening for a while. And, the nature of revolutions is that, they happen incrementally. And then, afterwards we sort of create these narratives. I mean, there's, the ideas that ultimately form the American Revolution are sort of in the culture. They're developing. They develop over a period of time. There are these sort of big events that we highlight, like the Boston Tea Party, obviously, right down the road from you, there's Lexington and Concord and whatever other events. And we sort of, historians come in and then they draw a nice line on the map and they say, this is where it started, right? But in practice, the reality is that it is this sort of, this process, and then we sort of make sense of it by categorizing beginning and whatever it may be. So I think the point is the revolution is happening, has been happening for quite some time, and I think, we're now sort of really reaching a point. I mean, so many of the conversations that we've been having with Thaddeus Russell, with Chris Ryan, and the conversations that Thaddeus has been having with Brett Venat are about the fact that this revolution is happening, and we should just acknowledge that it's happening, and we should actively work for it and then figure out how to responsibly make it happen. And funnily enough, I was talking to Thaddeus just before I was on the phone with you, and he was talking about who else we should, connect with about that revolution, and your name came up, and I said, Ricky. And he said, "Oh, I love Ricky. I was on Ricky's show." So the point is that, as one of the founding fathers of this podcasting revolution that is being podcasted, like, that's the thing. And our responsibility, really, I mean, I think what's so great is that unlike previous revolutions where, a group of people went away in a room and had a private conversation and then sort of like came out and presented it to the people, right? The founding fathers, you go into a room, you write the Declaration of Independence, and then you present it to the people. This is a totally different revolution because the revolution is being podcasted, it's open.
And we're sober, unlike the founding fathers.
That is true. And that is really the problem with this revolution so far is the degree of sobriety. I've been drinking coffee this whole time, not even Irish coffee. So, how good can the thoughts be? But I mean, and that's the thing is that, what hunter-gatherers want, as we sort of talked about in the podcast, is egalitarianism. Hunter-gatherers are very egalitarian, and that's a hardwired part of our biology. We don't like people who get big heads or think that they're, better than other people in some way, whether it's, physical strength or intelligence or anything like that. Point is to hold people accountable, because when people start to get a big head, ultimately they fuck us all over. So, we know that now about what, Lord Acton's famous line about power corrupts absolute, power corrupts absolutely. Dacher Keltner, who's awesome, who you should get on the show, by the way, who, he studies power, and specifically what power does to psychology is it makes people more impulsive and less empathetic. And so much of what we have to do is manage power. And, the big problem is then, the mechanisms for managing and holding that power accountable. I mean, the founding fathers, the mechanisms that were available with the technology of the time was, the sort of voting, the press. And so that's what they were really trying to encourage, was those mechanisms of accountability. Ultimately, as America and, other countries have evolved, you've been able to, groups that were sort of not included in the power equation have been able to, demand that they be included. And ultimately, I think that, that's what the technology is going to push for, or what the technology is going to empower, rather, is for us to get together and, sort of clarify things and create greater accountability. But the important thing to realize is that this isn't a function of bad humans. It's just a function of the psychology of power and what power does to human psychology, regardless of who the person is who's sitting in the big chair at that moment. So, and that's the thing. I think, the great thing about this revolution is that, it's going to be, hopefully, and, I think part of our responsibility as people who find themselves with a platform is to ensure that this revolution is not violent and is as peaceful as possible. And most of that just comes down to modeling the right behaviors, facilitating the right behaviors, facilitating the right sort of conversations, so that the narrative that we're driving is one that is inclusive of, like, this is just what it is to be human, guys. Like, people are in echo chambers, and if you're in an echo chamber and you're powerful, then you're going to not really know what's going on in other people's lives, and you're going to behave in shitty ways to them because power fucks with people's heads.
Yeah.
So but the revolution is happening.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think just the fact that we all got together, we're willing to get together, that all our, platforms exist, it's because people, I think, are striving to look for other options and open-minded, and kids are growing up with the internet now, so they're not as exposed to the mainstream media channels that are just going to feed them propaganda and whatnot. Most people get their news, most kids get their news from Twitter and Facebook and all this stuff, which now can be manipulated, as people can, just do your research on what Facebook has done with their experiments with changing, people's feeds and how that affects, what people think and how they feel. So that's getting scary within themselves. But that's the beautiful thing about podcasts, is that at least for the time being, we still have the freedom to talk about what we want, share the ideas we want, be open-minded, and we don't have any restrictions. And I really think that's what people are attracted to, because when they hear somebody like myself or yourself or Adam or Rogan or Brian Callen or Chris, and these people are open-minded and they don't seem like they're trying to sell you something. They're just kind of just sharing ideas and perspectives. I think people are attracted to that. I think curious people, because young people are very easily just manipulated, and you're soul searching. So it's like, if somebody gets there first and they convince you this is the right idea, you can stick to it for a long time before you realize maybe you're going down the wrong road. So I think it's very important to kind of share all ideas and then have this, because like you said, if not, then you'll go to I forget which comedian said it, you'll go to youagreewithme.com. Everybody goes to youagreewithme.com, where you're just constantly researching stuff that agrees with your already established opinion, and you're not really researching and looking at different ideas. So absolutely, I think we're all a part of this, and I can't be any happier about just doing my part and helping to share this and being able to connect with all you guys. So it's been a blast. Hopefully I'll have you on again, either with somebody else that's gonna share some ideas, or we'll just bullshit ourselves. But again, feel free to share this wherever you want. I think these conversations are super important, and I can't thank you enough for your work, Hunter. You're really taking a lot of your personal time and investing it in this journey, and I think that people have to there should be some appreciation to that, because I know for my part, I definitely appreciate it.
No, I want more insults on the internet. I've been enjoying them so much, as you pointed out. I mean, compliments. What can I do with a compliment? Oh, there's no like funny comeback. You have to be like, true. Oh, thank you. That was very nice of you. I appreciate it. Blah, blah, blah. When somebody comes in and tells me that I'm a cunt who has ruined mixed martial arts, I'm like, Jesus, this is the jackpot, right? I get to say, who else didn't like Toto? The Wicked Witch of the East and the Wicked Witch of the West. So there you go. That's the thing is, people are angry, people are stressed. It's entirely understandable. And, the point is, I think that what we're selling is, chill the fuck out. It's okay. It's understandable that you're freaked out and you're stressed out. You are fed this clickbait by the news media and this disaster porn. And, and then Facebook fucks with its algorithms and does its things and, create the youagreewithme.com. And the point is that if you actually go and talk to people, the majority of people, you can have a reasonable conversation with them and you can hash things out and you can learn some things from each other. And that's the point, is that instead of ganging up on each other, we should really gang up on the problem. And, that's not my line. I took that from these two UK artists named Fantic and Young. And the point is that in terms of what intelligence is, it's distributed. It's everywhere. You're going to find people with all sorts of insights all over the world. And really, all we have to do, Ricky, is connect the dots. We just have to pool all that insight, and then just redistribute it and make it available to everyone. And, I think that's the point, is that we, you've seen my apartment. We've seen Adam's house. We've seen your house. We aren't, billionaires.
I have a lion in the front yard. I have a lion in the front yard.
Jesus, Ricky. But the thing is that I just happen to have been family friends with the great Brian Callen, and so therefore was able to sneak onto his podcast and start booking guests. So now we have an audience and we have a platform, but it's circumstance and it's chance that I even happen to have this opportunity. And, that's the point. We've been given a privilege and we get to play a certain role in society. And, our job is to use that power that we've been entrusted with wisely. And, that's the real point, is that, with great power comes great responsibility. And if you have any sort of power, and we all have some sort of power, whatever power you have, you should use responsibly. And in the end, when people don't use that power responsibly, people will take it away from them. And, that is that great accountability mechanism that this technology makes possible.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Hunter. I can't thank you enough again for your time. You've been very gracious to spend many hours with me and talking to me. So I can't thank you enough for that. And Paleo Modern. I know I heard you and Chris Ryan talk about that shirt last time you guys got together. And
buy Chris Ryan swag.
Yeah, and if you don't listen to his podcast, Tangentially Speaking is awesome. He has and I think he represents how the very typical, what seems to be average people have very interesting lives and perspectives. And I think more than anybody, I think he finds these people traveling and people, friends of friends, and somebody that you might just see at a coffee shop, and next thing you know, he talks to them and they have some crazy life story and really interesting perspective. So I think sometimes we do put people based on their money or power or whatever on these pedestals where we think their opinions mean more. I am so sick, not to bring up somebody's initials that's SH, but it happens with him all the time, where it's just like, whoa, he's a scientist and he has a PhD and he's a best-selling author, and it's just like, well, that doesn't mean that anybody else's opinion should be any less valid just because of their background or resume or whatnot. So I think it's really important to listen to people, regardless what their background is or what their resume is, or if they do construction for a living. So I think it's really important. So thanks a lot, Hunter. We'll keep in touch, and enjoy your Thursday.
You too. Take care. Enjoy Thursday, and remember that cults are everywhere, including the Norse cult, which is still baked into the days of the week. All right. Take care.
All right. See you, Hunter. Thank you.